Welcome everyone, I'm Cristiano Casalini, the Academic Director of the Institute for Advanced Jesuit Studies. It's a pleasure to have you all here today to listen to a lecture of Brother Guy Consolmagno, and I thank you for your presence. I thank you on behalf of my institute, the Center for Ignatian Spirituality, and particularly to C21, the Church in the 21st Century. We are 3 units in the Mission and Ministry Division, and this is a first collaborative co-sponsored event that we run together, so it's a pleasure to have a full guest on 100 of people and attendance here. So I want to thank Emanuele Colombo, who is a research scholar at the Institute for Advanced Jesuit Studies. He's an historian in my department of formative education at Lynch as well, for organizing this event. Every time I see Brother Guy, I'm happy because every time I see him, normally I'm in Castel Gandolfo in Rome, which is a painful job and a painful place where to work with, I'm sure. And normally we see him in June, so it's really not that bad. Normally the Institute would offer events and seminars like for the things that we do. We are historians and we work on the Jesuits, on Jesuit history, Jesuit spirituality, on Jesuit pedagogy and education. The event today is, on the contrary, is not an eye on the Jesuit, but is a Jesuit eye on the world, or better say, a Jesuit eye on the universe. Without further ado, Brother Guy, I thank you so much for being with us. Emanuele, thank you for organizing, please.
Well, it's my great honor to introduce Guy Consolmagno. He's a Jesuit brother born in Detroit, but with an Italian last name, Consolmagno. He's a researcher and physicist widely known as the Pope's astronomer. Started as a freshman at Boston College, so he's coming back. And then received a degree at MIT and a Ph.D. in planetary sciences from the University of Arizona. After working as a researcher at Harvard and MIT and serving in the US Peace Corps in Kenya, he joined the Society of Jesus. Later, he began working at the Vatican Observatory, where he continued his research and played a key role in the science-faith dialogue. In 2015, Pope Francis appointed him director of the Vatican Observatory. At present, he is the president of the Vatican Observatory Foundation, and he's the author of numerous popular books, including Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? ? Today's talk and conversation are based on his most recent book, A Jesuit Guide to the Star, Exploring Wonder, Beauty, and Science. It's an amazing book with also beautiful picture. Please help me to welcome Brother Consolmagno.
Thank you so much, and thanks for coming out here. I wanted to break this talk into 3 topics, starting with wonder. And just to remind you, a reason to be wondering, there are 10 billion stars in our galaxy, more or less. 10 billion galaxies that we can see in the universe, more or less. The universe is so big. We are so small. How is it that we can actually think that God could pay attention to us? This is not a new problem. This came up in, Psalm 8. And the answer is either God couldn't possibly, and therefore, because I'm too small, or God actually does, which tells you how big God is. That's what looking at the stars can make you think about. It can bring an entire sense of wonder and perspective to your life. Consider the effect of people who can't look at the stars. Every year at the Vatican Observatory, we print up a calendar of astronomical images, and we give hundreds of these away to prisoners incarcerated in various places. And we get some fabulous letters. A prisoner from San Quentin wrote to us, "I'm able to see sights I haven't seen in 17 years. I'm able to look at wonder on this vast creation and just ponder all that is." That said, how many of us take the time to look at the sky? How many of us even know what phase of the moon it is right now? The sky's out there, it's free, anybody can look at it. Now, yes, we're in a city where there's light pollution. Light pollution is basically robbing us of the ability to look at the sky that way. It is robbing us of that sense of wonder. Pope Benedict, in a homily on Easter Saturday night in 2012, said essentially, in light pollution, human beings are creating their own lights to blind themselves to God's light. And isn't that, an example of human sinfulness? There was a time when I had also lost that sense of wonder. I got my doctorate. I had a postdoc at Harvard for a couple of years. I had another postdoc at MIT for a couple of years. 5 years as a postdoc, people in this audience will recognize, doesn't mean, oh, you're brilliant because you're at Harvard and MIT. It means couldn't get a real job. I was in the big leagues, but I was a utility infielder. And every day I'd walk across the Harvard Bridge. I had an office in that skyscraper, the Green Building, which is not green, only at MIT. And I'd be wondering, why am I knocking myself out, writing papers that only 5 people are going to read, and 2 of them are my enemies? When in fact, there are people starving in the world. And I did not have an answer. Why do we do astronomy when people are starving? And that and the fact that I wasn't going to get a job anyway, I abandoned science and I said, I'm going to join the US Peace Corps. I'll leave MIT. I threw away, I put all of my programs onto a magnetic tape, which was written in a format that nobody could read in 2 years, so I lost all of them. And instead, I went off and I said to the Peace Corps, I'll go anywhere you want me to go. I'll do anything you want me to do. I figured they'd make me a teacher, which they did. They sent me to Kenya. And at first, they were going to put me in a high school way up country where there's no black on the blackboards and no windows in the windows. I thought, yeah, send me in. And then they said, well, actually, you've got a Ph.D. We'll put you in the best high school in the country. Well, whatever. Within 6 months, I was teaching graduate astrophysics to graduate students at the University of Nairobi, which I could have been doing here in Boston. So why was I doing that? Well, I went with a bunch of other Peace Corps volunteers. There were, 80 of us all together. Most of them were upcountry, in places where there, windows in the windows, no black. I would set up my little telescope. And everybody in the village wanted to look through the telescope, and everybody in the village wanted to go, what's that? How does that fit in? What do we know about that? In a couple of places, they had slide projectors. Remember slide projectors? Slide projectors that operated off of car batteries for places where there was no electricity. And I had a handful of slides of, images from the Voyager, and they were thrilled about this. How many of you have ever seen the moon through a small telescope? Good enough. How many of you have ever seen the rings of Saturn through a small telescope? Okay. How many of you who have seen the rings of Saturn through a small telescope, how many of you have ever seen those rings and not gone, oh, wow? Because I've been doing that for, nearly 70 years. And I still go, oh, wow. And they go, oh, wow. At the time I was in Kenya, I had a cat. That was my cat, one of my fellow Peace Corps volunteers. Cat was much cleverer at being an astronomer, being a cat than I was. But Cat never wanted to look through the telescope. I also had an astronomy club at a local high school called the Starehe Boys Center. One of the best high schools in the country. The president of Kenya came to visit. And my astronomy club had set up, on their own, they'd put this together, a display of spaceships models that they had built, and they explained to President Moi why Kenya was the ideal place for astronautics in the future. Because you're on the equator where the Earth is spinning the fastest, and you're launched to the east to take advantage of that spin, which means you're launching over the Indian Ocean, so when the rocket blows up, not if, but when, it's not going to hit anybody in the head. And the president was fascinated by this, and I was just, blown away because they had put this all together themselves. And afterwards, one of the members of the president's entourage, this very stately woman, walks up to the kid who'd been doing all the talking, gives him a big hug, and the kid goes, "Oh, Mom!" Yeah, kids are the same everywhere. People are the same everywhere. We desire that sense of wonder. We live on that sense of wonder. To deny that to somebody because they were poor or they were born in the wrong continent or whatever is to deny them their humanity. Because we don't live by bread alone. I'd read that someplace. And it was literally true. For people in rural, upcountry, middle of nowhere Kenya to realize, hey, I can have this curiosity too. I can look through the telescope and wonder just like anyone else. Gives them the courage to say, okay, what else can I do? Like take big problems and break them into small ones that I can solve. That sense of wonder is not just a cool thing. It's essential to who we are as human beings. And that's why we have science. That's why Scripture starts with looking at the universe and asking the big questions, not just, oh, wow, look at the moon, but what's that all about? How did that come about? Now, if you've read Genesis chapter 1, you're probably going to think, oh, nobody pays attention to that anymore. The astronomy is 2,500 years old, which is true. But Genesis 1, chapter 1, is not about the creation of the universe. It's about the creator of the universe. Genesis 1 was probably written by Jewish scholars in Babylon during the Babylonian captivity. You can tell that because it's Babylonian astronomy that's described, a flat earth and a dome and water above and below. And that's good science. You look out the window, you can see the world is flat and there's a dome coming down to the horizon. 100 years later, the Greeks had worked out, no, that's not what's going on, but that's 100 years later. This is the best science of the day. And the Babylonians had their creation story. In the Babylonian story, the gods are busy fighting with each other, and a dragon called Tiamat shows up. Tiamat is related to the word in Genesis for the primordial chaos. And Marduk fights the dragon, kills the dragon. The dragon's corpse creates the dome that we're all living under because by accident, human beings got made. Totally unintentional. But these human beings gathered together inside the corpse of the dragon and created the most wonderful and glorious creation of all of creation, the city of Babylon. And the Jewish scholars are going, yeah, but no. What's important in Genesis is not where it parallels the Babylonians, but where it comes up with something different. First of all, the Creator is already present. In the beginning, God. So God is not a part of the universe. God is outside the universe. The Creator is one. There's only one God. There aren't all of these other gods running around doing things. If you don't have a God of lightning throwing lightning bolts, then you are free to ask, okay, where do the lightning bolts come from? Never thought about that question before. Unlike the pagan gods, this Creator God is not a substitute for the forces of nature. In the story of Genesis 1, creation occurs as logical as day follows night, step by step by step, beginning with light. Let there be light. And I'm not talking about the sun and the moon, because that's not till the fourth day. So what the light in chapter 1 in their let there be light is, everything is occurring in the open where it can be seen. There are none of those man was not meant to know bits of science of the universe. All of it is visible. And every step of the way, God deliberately causes the universe. It's not by accident. And God steps back and says, it's good. There was a scholar who said, you could translate that, the Hebrew. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. People in the room can correct me. But I like this story anyway, so don't. He said, you could translate that as God saying, yeah, that works. And if you're an engineer, there's no higher praise. Yeah. I like this universe. That works. This means in this universe, the universe is fundamentally good, and evil is not a rival deity, but merely the absence of a good that ought to be there. And this fundamentally changes the way you think about the universe. There are those who will tell you that chocolate was the invention of the devil, designed to give you acne and make you fat. But in the universe of the people of the book, the Jews, the Muslims, the Christians, chocolate is a foretaste of the goodness of God. It's almost a sacramental, as long as you don't abuse it. All creation is the deliberate action of the Word of God. Pope Francis talks about this in Laudato Si when he says, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, the world came about as a result of a decision, not chaos, not chance. And this exalts the universe. The creating word expresses a free choice. The universe didn't emerge as a result of an arbitrary omnipotence, or a show of force, or a desire for self-assertion, but as an act of love. And think of your relationship to acts of creation, paintings, poetry, books. You can tell the difference when the author main message is, look at me, I'm clever, rather than here is something beautiful that I want to share. And of course, nothing is hidden. As Benedict said in that same homily, when God says, let there be light, light makes life possible, makes encounter possible, makes communication possible, it makes knowledge possible. It makes access to reality, to truth possible. And that's what makes freedom and progress possible. And finally, what is the end point? What is the most important thing created in the Genesis story? What does it all lead to? What is the greatest and most wonderful thing, the most surprising, the most unexpected thing in the 7 days of creation? What is the last and best thing created? Man was created on the sixth day. It's the Sabbath. It's the weekend. We were created so that we could have that sense of wonder, so that at least one day out of 7, we could kick back and look at the universe and go, oh, wow, that's what we were made for. This is important if you're a sort of person who wants to help the poor, which is a good thing. What is your goal in helping the poor? To make them rich? Then they're part of the problem. The goal is to make sure that everybody can spend one day out of 7 without having to worry about what are they going to eat. Or they can enjoy the universe, whether it's through art or music or dance or watching Star Wars, whatever it is. God makes us so that we can be astronomers. That's why you do astronomy, even when there's people starving in the world. That's why we're also starving for astronomy. We're driven by the desire that is the desire for God. So, Genesis says, hey, it's a cool thing to look at the universe. Is it really a necessary thing? You know, whoever wrote Genesis had no idea about the Big Bang. They had no idea about galaxies and 100 billion stars and 100 billion galaxies, and they were still pretty good people. Do we really need that? The book of Job, of all places, tells us something different. Job, you remember the story. Job has this big crisis, and around chapter 9, he says things like, how can a mortal be just before God? If one wishes to contend with him, you couldn't answer him once in 1,000. He moves the mountains, he overturns them. He shakes the earth, the pillars tremble. He commands the sun, and it rises or does not. He can seal up the stars. He stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea and made the Bear and Orion and the Pleiades and the chambers of the south, who does great things beyond understanding, marvelous things without wonder. Sounds very pious. And God, 30 chapters later, gets around to answering him by saying, who are you to say this? Wait a minute. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Do you understand what that was? Who were you? Where were you when I determined the measurements? Do you know that? On what was the universe based? Who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. Do you know the way to the dwelling of light? Do you know the laws of the sky? Why is God saying this? Because he wants to show off to Job, look, I'm smarter than you. Job already knew that. What God is saying is, looking at the universe isn't enough. I want you to really understand the universe. I want you to really come to grips with it. Only then can you appreciate who I am as the creator. So being intellectuals is not just a cool thing. It's something that we are called to do, and to do continuously. It's a command from the Creator. In that way, we can join the morning stars singing their glory to God. The last point is a sense of beauty. Because the odd thing is, the science of the universe is itself as beautiful as the universe itself. About 20 years ago, I taught a class in E&M, freshman electricity and magnetism at Fordham. And I asked to teach this because this was one of my favorite classes when I took it. And we had gone through Maxwell's equations, and we had written all the difference, how electricity behaves and how the magnetic field behaves. And this was paralleling what Maxwell had done. And they almost look like parallel equations. The equations for the electric field is almost the same as the equations for the magnetic field. Well, there was a piece missing, and Maxwell proposed maybe there was this piece that nobody had noticed. He was right. One of them has a negative sign that the other doesn't have, which is kind of curious. And then, as I'm doing this on the blackboard in front of the class, I go, okay, so you take the derivative of this one with time, and you take the derivative of that one with space, and suddenly you've got common terms, and you put them all together, and you've got an equation just for the electric field that says the change of the electric field in time is equal to some number times the change of the electric field in space. And likewise for the magnetic field. And your eyes are all glazing over at this point, right? And there's a kid in the front row, best kid in the class, who looks up and he goes, "Oh my God, it's a wave." That's it. And that number, that little constant, is the square of the speed of the wave. It's a wave that's traveling at the speed of light. And Maxwell suddenly showed that electricity and magnetism that's what light is. It comes out of the equations, and it just blows your mind away. Because it's a wave, Mr. Marconi can set up a wire and have the electricity bounce up and down at a certain frequency, turn it on and off and on and off. And the radii, or one singular radio, then can send signals. Because it's a wave, you can transmit power from Niagara Falls to New York City. Because it's a wave, the electromagnetic wave coming out of a star will interact with the chemicals nearby, and certain resonant frequencies will be absorbed. And when I look at the spectrum, I can tell you what chemicals are in the star. And ultimately, because it's a wave, I wind up with relativity and quantum theory. And it's all because it was a beautiful theory to say there must be this extra term that would make it beautiful. Beauty is what leads us to truth. Doesn't have to be, but there it is. This beauty is, of course, what inspired St. Ignatius. We're told the greatest consolation he felt was to look at the stars, and he did this a lot. The Jesuits, the first companions who made the Jesuit order, were all a bunch of nerds at the University of Paris. They understood this. And when Ignatius finally came up with his spiritual exercises, the heart of them is found in what's called the principle and foundation. Let me quote. "We are created to praise, reverence, and serve God. The things of the world have been created to help us do this. We're to use the things that lead us to this goal. And if the things don't lead us to God, don't worry about it. You can be indifferent to them. It's not that they're evil. Might help somebody else. Don't desire things like health or rich or honor. Desire only that which helps us to become what God created us to be." Now, how does this fit into beauty and science? Notice the word that I put in red in all these slides, things. God created things. God created us. We are created things. The creation of the universe is, and in this created universe, this is the place where we encounter God. Since the beginning of time, God has revealed himself in the things God created. Do we have any Protestants in the room who know where that comes from? Catholics never read the Bible, I know that. It's from Paul's letter to the Romans. Chapter 1, verse 22. I'm not sure I read that book beyond there, but I got that part. The spirituality of the Jesuits is all about our place in creation, in space and in time, why we were created, why the world was created. That's what it means to say that we're finding God in all things. There was a physicist who became an Anglican priest, John Polkinghorne. In one of his lectures, he comes up with this marvelous phrase, "We are not apprentice angels." I'm not Casper the Friendly Ghost stuck in this stupid meat body waiting to get out. No. We are the envy of the angels. Angels don't have chocolate. We do. Jesus Christ came as a human being, so loved this creation that became part of it. In our stories of angels, we have no sense that, the second person became another angel. That's why it's important to know and love and appreciate and keep beautiful the creation that we've been given. But there's another way that Jesuits have engaged in the universe. George Manley Hopkins wrote, "The world," speaking of this creation, "the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed." Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared and smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs. Because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. It turns out George Manley Hopkins was an amateur astronomer. He wrote several poems about astronomy. One that I love is this early poem of his, "I am like a slip of comet, scarce worth discovery." This is a character in a play he was writing. "I am like a slip of comet, scarce worth discovery, in some corner scene bridging the slender difference between two stars." It turns out there was a comet when he was writing this that actually went between two stars. We know which comet he was talking about. He had seen that comet. Come out of space, or engendered by heady elements, no man knows, but when she sights the sun, she grows and sizes and spins her skirts out, while her central star shakes its cocooning mists. Brilliant description of what happens to a comet as it gets close to the sun. And so she comes to fields of light. Millions of traveling rays pierce her, and she hangs upon the flame-cased sun and sucks the light as full as Gideon's fleece. Then her tether calls her, she falls off, and as she dwindles, shreds her smock of gold amidst the sistering planets, till she comes to single Saturn, last and solitary, and then goes out into the cavernous dark. So I go out. My little sweet is done. I've drawn heat from this contagious sun to not ungentle death. Now forth I run. Our religion, our book of Genesis, gives us the assumptions that we need to do science. Every logical system has to start with axioms. The axioms of science are that the physical universe is real. I'm not just a butterfly dreaming I'm a scientist. I'm actually studying something that's real, even if I don't have a complete grasp of what it is. One of the assumptions of science is that there are laws to be found. Other religions might say that Jupiter threw the lightning bolt. If we don't say that, then our religion says that God made the universe in a logical way, and we can figure out that logic. And our religion says that it is worth studying. And that gives us the cover to spend our lives doing something as useless as looking at the colors of stars and classifying them and wondering, where do they come from? For those of us who are called to be scientists, the exploration of God's creation is a response to an invitation to spend time with the Creator. We get to play with Him. And in that play, we get to encourage God to show His personality to us. But even if you're not a professional scientist, you can be a spectator and watch this play and appreciate and see the personality of God. This is, I think, what makes science Jesuit, why there is a Jesuit guide to the stars. We do it to find God in all things. We engage both the head and the heart, both our logic and our poetry, and we do it to share with each other as we can all together get to know the Creator and all together look through the telescope and go, oh, wow. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
The picture of Pius XII at the Vatican Observatory. So you have been the director of the Vatican Observatory. Why the Vatican as an observatory? Why did the Pope feel the need to have an observatory?
There's 3 steps in the history of it. Astronomy was one of the topics that you were expected to learn before you could go on to get a doctorate in theology or philosophy. That was the medieval university. Of course, those are the only things worth getting doctorates in. Nowadays, I have a Ph.D., which I guess is still a doctor of philosophy. Okay, yes. It's still an essential thing to know the universe. The second reason, and this came up in the time of Galileo and before, it was to reform the calendar. The Pope Gregory XIII hired astronomers to help work out the system of reforming the calendar. It does change the view you have of God. The bigger you see the universe, the bigger you understand God is. But in the 1890s in particular, Leo XIII, the previous Leo, had 2 goals. One was to show the world that the church supported science, which then raises the question, why did anybody think the church didn't support science? It's not because of Galileo. Everything you know about Galileo is probably wrong. The truth doesn't make the church look any better, but the problem they had with Galileo was not being anti-science, because there were other scientists. And the arguments against Galileo were scientific arguments. Given what they knew at the time, they couldn't figure out how to make the Copernican system work. And it took another 100 years before they were finally able to do that. Why is there this myth that the church is anti-science? It's a 19th century myth. It is a 19th century idea that comes out of the politics of the 19th century. As the growth of the city, of the nation state in Europe, the church was seen as a rival, so people were looking for a way to beat up on the church. Well, they're not modern because they don't have science. They had brilliant scientists, but forget that. And in America, Andrew Dixon White wrote this book on the war between science and religion. He was the guy who founded Cornell, by the way. And his goal was to show that we have to improve the race of Americans, a sort of indirect eugenics, by keeping out people with vowels at the end of their names, like Colombo, like Consolmagno, who all happen to be Catholic, like Lewandowski. Got to keep those terrible people out, or they're just going to ruin the place. The church was one of the few outfits that spoke out against eugenics when Oliver Wendell Holmes was approving it in the Supreme Court, when Alexander Graham Bell was promoting it in National Geographic. And so this is why the church had to say, no, what we're saying is not on the basis of we're afraid of science, just the opposite. There was also the political bit. This showed that the Holy See was a nation and had its own national observatory.
Yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit how does the observatory work? I mean, Cristiano was mentioning we bring every year some of our students to Castel Gandolfo, where there is, we can say, there are the old instruments, but then there is an interesting connection between the Vatican and the United States, which in these days is not that popular, and a scientific connection. How does it work?
Well, Originally, they wanted a program that the astronomers could do that showed their international status. So they were immediately a part of a program to photograph the entire sky when photography was just being invented. And we've got a telescope to this day, dates from 1891, which was a big photographic camera. Every nation that participated was given its own piece of the sky to photograph, and then on the photographic plates, you measure where the stars are. We had one place, Italy had a different place. Vatican is different from Italy. That sense of doing international programs has continued. In the 1930s, Italy and the Vatican finally agreed that the Vatican was independent. Old territory that the Vatican used to have, like Castel Gandolfo, was given back to the Vatican. Light pollution meant we built telescopes there. And again, we took part in an international program of determining the spectra of pure elements to be compared against the spectra of stars. And then after the war, the work developed into kind of modern astronomy. By the 1970s, George Coyne, an American, was made the director. I had known him when I was a student at Arizona. He had connections to Arizona. Light pollution meant we couldn't use the telescopes there. So we built a telescope in Arizona. That's why we've got a foundation. That's why I'm out here raising money. If you don't know what to do with your second $1 million, come and talk to me. But this telescope and the work that we do now, there are now a dozen Jesuit astronomers. We're all Jesuits because it means that we can live in the same community under the same rule and pool our resources, so we work cheap. But we come from 4 continents, soon to be 5 continents, because there's a fellow doing his studies about to be ordained here at Boston College from Australia, and we're hoping that he'll join us. And, 12 languages, and I think that's just Paul Gabor from the Czech Republic who speaks 12 languages. Doing every kind of science from the mathematics of the Big Bang to measuring meteorite properties to looking at galaxies. The science that we do is, we hope, good science. My boss, when I arrived, George Coyne, said, "This is your job. Do good science. You're free to choose whatever science you want. And if it takes 10 years to get your data together, that's okay." Before I was a Jesuit, I was being paid by NASA grants. And a NASA grant will pay you only if somebody at NASA has decided this is a program that we want somebody to do. So it's their choice, not yours. And you better have results after 3 years or you're not going to get your grant renewed. I didn't have any of that when I got to the Vatican. So it took me 10 years to put together a database of meteorite properties. But now we are the people that the world comes to. Bob Mackey, who took over the meteorite lab when I became the director, he was invited to be part of the OSIRIS-REx mission to measure the samples brought back by asteroid Bennu. So that's how the science works. We do the long-term projects that complement the work that our colleagues do. We've all gotten doctorates from the same universities as everyone else. Everybody at the observatory has 5 colleagues at 5 different universities, so that we are deeply plugged into the astronomical world. The fellow who wrote the definition of a planet involving Pluto was a Jesuit priest at the Vatican Observatory. The fellow who was the vice president of the IAU's division on spectroscopy was a Jesuit priest. The guy who's the president of the Meteoritical Society, and who at one time was the head of the American Astronomical Society's division for planetary scientists, have all been members of the Vatican Observatory.
Thank you so much. Following,
I could go on for another hour, but
following this line of thought, in your book you mention as the father of astrophysics a Jesuit priest, 19th century Jesuit priest from Reggio Emilia, Italy, Angelo Secchi, which is almost unknown.
Yeah.
So why is he the father of astrophysics and why is he unknown?
When people were measuring the positions of stars, including photographing the sky, it had a practical use. You'd use that for timekeeping, you'd use that for navigation. That's what the government paid for it. Secchi had a background in physics. He'd been following what Fraunhofer and other people had done. He put a prism in front of the lens, turned every star into a rainbow, saw the colors that were missing, and identified them with the chemicals in the stars. He also realized that the brightest color tells you the temperature of the star. And if those lines are slightly shifted to the red or the blue, it tells you the motions of the stars. People had done this for 1 or 2 stars before him. He did it for 5,000 stars and classified stars in a way that was later taken up at Harvard. He went and took science out of the question, where are the stars, what time is it, to what are the stars. That is astrophysics. Nobody had done that before. And notice, it's a fascinating thing to ask, and it has absolutely no physical usefulness in terms of making money. But it feeds our curiosity, and it's what astronomers do to this day. And he's not the only 19th century priest doing science. You know, Gregor Mendel, inventing genetics. In your cell phone, you've got a charger. The charger says so many amps, so many volts. Alessandro Volta was a devout Italian Catholic. Jean-Marie Ampère was a devout French Catholic, survivor of the French Revolution. You look him up in Wikipedia. Fascinating character. Involved in the founding of the St. Vincent de Paul Society.
Thank you so much. When we visited Castel Gandolfo, you showed us your collection, the collection of meteorites. You have been studying meteorites for many years. And in this book, you say meteorites are like relics. Why this image?
A relic reminds you that somebody that you've heard fabulous stories about was actually a real person. This is something that person wore. This is a bone out of their body. That's why we go to cemeteries to remind ourselves that famous people were real people. I think it's really important, especially for people in the United States, because so much of church history is about people from long ago and far away. When I was in Albano, which is the town next to Castel Gandolfo, went to the cathedral one weekday mass, and the pastor got up, and today is the feast day of St. Maria Goretti. And he says, and I'd like to invite a sister up who was the niece, or the grandniece, I forget which. Maria Goretti was a local. Everybody in town knows the family. Saints are real. Planets are real. They're not just pictures on a computer screen. They're not just things that you see through your telescope. I mean, my friends look studying planets through a telescope. They think they're studying Jupiter. They're just studying photons. I can actually touch pieces that went into planets and measure them in the lab and poke them and prod them and rip them apart and discover which of our theories actually work and which of our theories need more work.
Thank you very much. You often talk about you being a Jesuit and a scientist, you having the ring of MIT and the cross.
Or the collar.
And the collar. Maybe you can tell us more about how did being a scientist affected your vocation and also vice versa.
Well, I started out as a freshman. I was in the CLX dorms. I don't know what the undergraduate life here is anymore. When I was an undergraduate, there was sometimes parties going on in these dorms. The local liquor store would deliver to the freshman dorms. And I realized I was a nerd and I didn't fit in.
I don't think it happens.
It doesn't happen anymore. I was a nerd, I didn't fit in. So I thought to get out of the freshman dorms, I'd become a Jesuit priest. I go to one of the priests on campus, and he goes, "Have you prayed about this?" Of course, I hadn't prayed. I'm 18 years old. Who prays? He says, "Go to your room, close the door." So I kick out my roommate, who was dating the girl that I was interested in. Another reason to become a priest. And I'm asking God, and God's saying, "What do you think you're going to be if you're a priest?" Like, what's your job going to be? It's going to be taking care of people with problems, just like the guys you're trying to get away from. You'd be a terrible priest. Okay. What are you good at? I'm good at being a nerd. Where are you happy? I'm happy hanging out at the science fiction club at MIT. My best friend from high school was going there. I mean, MIT was 9-to-1 male to female, so it was going to be an avowed celibacy either way. And well, you heard the rest of the story of how that ultimately was not enough. And after the Peace Corps, I got a job teaching at Lafayette College. I discovered that actually I enjoyed talking to undergraduates, but I was still not called to be a priest. And at the wedding of a couple of Peace Corps friends of mine, I'm looking at God, okay, now what am I supposed to do? And God says, now's the time to be a brother, because you have learned to experience God and know what God's voice sounds like. That's what being a scientist had done for me. And you had learned all the wrong reasons to do something and to not be misled by them. And I was really happy teaching at Lafayette College. I had learned that now when you're happy is the time to say, okay, what's the next step? Not when you're miserable and you got to get out of the freshman dorms. That sense of being familiar with the voice of God is what allowed me to be comfortable and confident in my vocation. So as a brother, I still take the 3 vows. Poverty, well, I'd been a grad student, I was used to that. And chastity, I'd been a grad student, I was used to that. The odd thing was obedience. I was hoping I could teach at Boston College, but instead, under obedience, they ordered me to go live in the Pope's palace and eat that terrible food and look at that awful scenery, and oh yeah, take care of 1,000 meteorites, which, is my field.
Thank you. I have the last question for you, which is the most important, is the reason why I organized the entire event. Would you baptize an extraterrestrial?
Buy my book and find out. Go to Amazon and any book with my name on it, buy 2 copies, just to be sure. I'll give you the short answer, which is in the book. Only if they ask. The question was asked to me by a British journalist, with the dregs of journalism. And I didn't realize it was supposed to be a trick question. If an extraterrestrial comes to Earth, obviously they're more advanced than us. Who the heck do you are that you think you can baptize them? If an extraterrestrial comes to Earth and they're so advanced to us, and you don't baptize them, then you're saying that baptism is only for us yokels here in the outskirts of the universe. Either way, it looks rad. But if I say the extraterrestrial comes from Earth, more advanced than us, and is asking for baptism, then who the heck are you, Mr. Journalist, that you're poo-pooing it? I didn't know I was getting out of a trap question. It's just good theology. You only baptize people when they ask for it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for coming.
I wanna thank everyone for being here, and we hope of having Brother Consolmagno back next year for another conversation. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you.